On a freezing Seattle morning, a soldier returned from years of war carrying only his scars and his German shepherd, Valor. But what stopped him in his tracks wasn't the battlefield echo in his mind. It was the sight of two little girls in torn pink dresses, wiping car windows with trembling hands. When one whispered, "We just want milk," the words pierced deeper than any bullet. In that instant, the soldier knew his next fight wasn't overseas. It was right here, against the darkness that threatened these children. Seattle's winter morning had its own sharp edge. The sky was low and gray, the kind of heavy curtain that threatened snow, but offered only a biting drizzle. The streets glistened with dampness, the air tinged with salt from the nearby bay. Declan Hayes stood in that cold, his breath rising in visible clouds as he shut the door of his old pickup truck. 40 years behind him, 20 spent in uniform, his body bore the weight of places most people would never see. Deserts that scorched the skin, villages scarred by gunfire, and nights when the silence was broken only by radio static and the pounding of his own heart. Now far from war, he wore a plain green military jacket softened by time, his dark hair cut short, his jawline weathered, his gray-blue eyes restless as if they were always searching for threats hidden in plain sight. At his side moved Valor, his German shepherd. 5 years old, broad-chested and muscled with a black and tan coat that gleamed even in the dim light, Valor carried himself with the quiet alertness of a seasoned guardian. His ears flicked with every sound, his eyes scanning as though he too had learned the soldier's way of reading the world. Declan often said Valor was more than a dog. He was the last piece of family he had left. Trained on bases, loyal in every storm, Valor had been his companion in foreign lands where no human warmth survived. Together, they shared both silence and scars. Declan crossed the lot toward a convenience store, intent on grabbing a carton of milk and a stale sandwich, the breakfast of someone who had long stopped caring about the rituals of comfort. Seattle's streets bustled faintly, workers with hunched shoulders and hurried steps, the city waking to another day. Yet just outside his truck, the world shifted. Two small figures stood pressed against his windshield. They looked too fragile for the season, their bodies thin against the wind. Twins unmistakably so, the same heart-shaped faces, pale with cold. The same tangled brown hair sticking in clumps to their cheeks. The same pink dresses, faded from wear, their hems frayed. The only difference was in their eyes. One girl's gaze held more defiance, the other's more pleading. Each clutched an old rag, and on the ground lay a stuffed teddy bear with a missing eye, its fur matted by time. Their arms moved mechanically, rubbing at the glass. Their small hands reddened, covered with faint cuts as if life itself had scraped away at them. Declan stopped, the carton of milk in his hand growing heavier. Valor, sensing his hesitation, tilted his head, then patted forward with a low whine. The girls froze at first, fear flickering in their wide brown eyes. Then the bolder of the two, Ellie, reached out timidly, brushing her fingers along Valor's fur. Grace, quieter, followed, resting her small palm against the dog's shoulder. Their bodies relaxed as if this animal was the first living thing in days that had not demanded something from them. Declan crouched to their level, his voice deep but steady. "Who told you to do this?" he asked. His words carried no anger, only the weight of disbelief. Grace looked down, her rag slipping from her fingers. Ellie bit her lip, then whispered so softly it was nearly lost in the breeze. "We just want milk." The soldier's chest tightened. It was not just the words, it was the echo they carried. He remembered himself at 10, standing outside a rundown bar in Kentucky, holding a rag, hoping for coins, hungry enough to chew on stale bread when the world looked away. The cold that clawed at these children was the same cold that had carved scars into his own youth. He held out the carton of milk he had just bought, along with the sandwich. "Take this," he said firmly. "Eat now." Ellie's eyes widened. Grace hesitated as if waiting for the gift to be snatched away. Their hands shook as they accepted the offering. Declan saw the way they clutched the carton, how they drank in tiny sips, careful not to spill a drop as though each mouthful was treasure. Valor pressed his nose against their arms, his warmth breaking through the icy morning. Grace managed a faint smile, a whisper of trust forming in the air. Declan realized in that moment that he could not simply walk away. War had taught him that leaving the vulnerable behind was the first step to losing humanity. He asked gently, "Where do you live? Where are your parents?" The girls glanced at one another. Finally, Ellie spoke. "Our mom, she's gone. We live with Travis, our stepdad." She paused, swallowing hard. "If we don't bring him money, he says there'll be nothing to eat." Declan's jaw clenched. He saw the bruises hidden beneath the cuffs of their sleeves, the shadows under their young eyes. He knew that kind of hunger, that kind of fear, and he also knew the kind of man who used children as shields for his own failures. As they spoke, Seattle's weak winter sun bled through the fog, outlining the soldier, the dog, and the two fragile figures in pink. The parking lot, once an ordinary space of engines and exhaust, had become the stage of a silent promise. Declan's past and present converge, and standing there, he understood his next mission was not on some battlefield overseas. It was here, in his own city, in the lives of two little girls who had whispered a truth he could never ignore. He placed a hand gently on Ellie's shoulder, the other near Grace's. Valor sat upright beside them, ears pricked, as though he too had sworn an oath. "You're safe with me," Declan said, his voice steady, almost a vow. And as the twins clutched the milk and teddy bear tighter, the soldier realized he had just stepped into the most important battle of his life. The drizzle had turned to a light rain by the time Declan Hayes guided the twins back toward the place they called home. Seattle's skyline loomed in the distance like a cold sentinel. But here in the South Side neighborhood, the streets were narrower, the buildings older, their facades stained with years of neglect. The twins walked close together, Ellie holding the tattered teddy bear against her chest while Grace clung to Valor's thick fur, as though the dog were the only shield she could trust. Declan stayed half a step behind them, his eyes sharp, surveying each corner, each shadow, the old instincts of a soldier refusing to release him. He had fought in places where danger hid in silence, and he recognized that same silence here. When they reached the apartment building, it looked less like a home and more like a wounded relic. The exterior was gray concrete cracked with mildew, and a flickering bulb over the entrance buzzed faintly in the damp air. A rusted fire escape clung precariously to the side, its metal ribs creaking in the wind. Declan took in the sight with a frown. A man who had seen enough ruined compounds overseas could smell decay and despair long before stepping inside. And this place reeked of both. The twins climbed the steps with the weariness of children too accustomed to carrying burdens heavier than their years. Valor padded behind, growling softly, his hackles lifting as though he could already sense what waited inside. Declan's jaw tightened. He was not walking into an enemy outpost, yet his gut told him this encounter would require the same resolve. The door to Unit 3B opened before Declan could knock. Standing in the frame was Travis Dawson, their stepfather. Travis was in his late 30s but looked older, the life beaten out of him by vice and indifference. His sandy hair was greasy, clinging to his forehead, and his unshaven jaw carried a permanent shadow. Bloodshot eyes darted from Declan to the twins to Valor with suspicion. He wore a threadbare t-shirt stained with old beer, and the smell of smoke and liquor clung to him like a second skin. "Well, well," Travis muttered, his voice low and hoarse. "Looks like my little workers found themselves a soldier savior." His lips curled into something halfway between a sneer and a smirk. He looked past the girls as if they were tools rather than children. "How much did you make today?" Ellie and Grace stiffened, shrinking back. Valor moved forward, positioning his body between the girls and Travis. His low rumble filled the hallway. Travis flinched but quickly covered it with false bravado. "Call off your mutt," he snapped. Declan stepped inside without asking permission, his presence filling the room. The apartment was a pit. Trash littered the floor, empty beer bottles rolled beneath the couch, and the stench of mildew and stale smoke clawed at the nose. A broken TV played a muted sports channel while a sagging recliner slouched in the corner. There was no sign of toys, no sign of warmth. In the kitchen, a refrigerator door hung crooked, revealing its sparse contents. Half a bottle of whiskey, expired condiments, and nothing else. Declan's stomach turned. He had seen barracks in war zones with more humanity than this. Travis dropped onto the couch with a groan. reaching for a cigarette. Lighting it with a shaky flick of the lighter, he exhaled a stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "Listen, soldier boy," he said, waving the cigarette like a weapon. "If you think you can just stroll in here and play hero, you better think again. These kids are mine. Their mama left them to me. You want a medal? Then you pay $1,000. Back pay for raising them all these years." Declan's eyes hardened. He did not flinch, did not blink. "Children aren't something you buy and sell," he said evenly. "They're not paychecks. They're not tools." Travis leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, smoke curling around his crooked grin. "Big words for someone who doesn't know what it takes to keep mouths fed. You think I like sending them out? You think the world cares about two little brats? Number, but they bring in cash, and cash keeps me in this dump." He jabbed his cigarette toward Declan. "So unless you're ready to pay, get out." The twins pressed themselves against Valor, who sat like a stone wall, ears pinned forward, lips curled just enough to show his teeth. Declan knew one wrong move would trigger Travis's violence, but he also knew Valor's presence was keeping him at bay. The soldier had always trusted the dog's instincts, and right now Valor was telling him this man was not just neglectful, he was dangerous. Declan crouched beside Ellie and Grace. "Go to your room," he said gently. "Take Valor with you." They hesitated, eyes darting between the two men, then obeyed, Valor trotting after them. Travis laughed harshly. "See? You got them trained already. Good for you, soldier." Declan rose to his full height. "Number what I see are two children living in filth with a man who treats them like burdens. You've already failed them." Travis's eyes narrowed. His bravado cracked for an instant, revealing something darker beneath fear. "You don't know me," he snapped. "You don't know what I've lost." Declan tilted his head, reading the man. He saw the faint traces of a wedding ring mark on Travis's finger, the bitterness of someone who had watched life slip away. Still, sympathy could not excuse cruelty. Declan had lost too, yet he did not destroy those weaker than himself. Before Declan could respond, a knock echoed faintly at the door. Travis stiffened, suspicion flashing across his face. Declan turned the handle and opened the door slightly. Outside stood an elderly woman, wrapped in a thick wool robe, her silver hair neatly tied back. Mrs. Evelyn Whitmore, a neighbor from across the hall. She was small, frail in frame, yet her eyes carried clarity, the kind that had seen too much and remembered everything. "Evening," she said softly, glancing past Declan to where Travis sat. Her voice lowered to a whisper only Declan could hear. "If you truly care about those girls, come back before it's too late. They don't have much time left in there." Her eyes lingered, a plea and a warning in one. Then she retreated quickly into the shadows of her apartment, closing her door before Travis noticed. Declan absorbed the words, feeling the weight of both urgency and inevitability. He had seen enough to know the truth. This was not just neglect. It was a prison for the twins. And as Valor returned from the bedroom, pressing his body against Declan's leg, the soldier understood. War had not ended for him. It had simply taken a new shape, one where the enemy lived behind closed doors, and the lives at stake were two children who had whispered only for milk. The days that followed Declan's first confrontation with Travis Dawson unfolded under a cloud that felt heavier than the Seattle rain. Declan tried to focus on his routine, keeping Valor exercise, watching the apartment from a distance, checking in on Ellie and Grace whenever he could manage without drawing too much attention. But danger doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, through whispers, through screens, through shadows. Travis had learned how to weaponize them all. It began with a photograph. Declan had not noticed the man at first, a figure lurking near the corner store, on the morning he had handed milk and bread to the twins. The stranger, in his late 20s, thin, with a beanie pulled low over stringy blonde hair and tattoos curling up the side of his neck, had leaned against the wall, pretending to smoke while his phone angled just right. Now those images had surfaced online. A hardened soldier crouching near two fragile children in pink dresses, a loyal German shepherd looming beside them like a guard. On its own, it was innocent, but the captions twisted it into poison. Strange man lures children. Beware of predators in uniform. Rich ex-military using kids for show. Declan saw the post 2 nights later when Samantha Cole called him. Samantha was 35, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, with a precision that came from years of navigating both courtroom politics and public storms. She was of mixed heritage, her father Irish, her mother Korean, and she carried herself with an elegance honed by discipline. She had been Declan's legal advisor since his discharge when bureaucratic red tape tangled his benefits, and though she never admitted it, she had taken a personal interest in making sure he didn't drown in silence after leaving the military. Declan, you need to see this, she said, her voice clipped, holding her tablet up in her office. The glow of the screen painted her face in hard lines. Someone's running a smear campaign? Look, Declan studied the headlines, his jaw tightening. Travis. Most likely, Samantha replied. He knows you've seen too much. If he can make you look like the enemy, then anything you do for those girls can be painted as predatory. This is deliberate. Declan rubbed his temple, feeling the old tension coil in his shoulders. I can fight men with weapons. But lies? Samantha leaned forward. Then we gather truth, witnesses, proof. The neighbors, the store owner who saw the girls begging for food, the conditions of that apartment, everything. She paused, lowering her voice. Declan, he's not just careless. He's calculating. Don't underestimate him. That night, Declan parked his truck across from the apartment, Valor resting in the passenger seat, ears alert. The rain tapped steady against the windshield. He couldn't shake the words of Mrs. Whitmore, the neighbor, before it's too late. Declan had learned to trust instinct, and Valor's restless growls told him danger was near. Around midnight, movement flickered in the shadows. A man approached the building, different from the one with the phone. He was broad-shouldered, mid-40s, with a leather jacket that glistened wet under the streetlight. His posture was casual, but his eyes, sharp and shifting, betrayed the practiced watchfulness of someone used to deals in the dark. He knocked twice on Travis's door. Declan stiffened. Valor pressed against the window, letting out a low bark. Declan hushed him gently, though his own pulse quickened. Through the curtains, he glimpsed Travis's silhouette. Words were exchanged too low to catch. Then money flickered between hands. A small envelope passed from Travis to the man in leather. Declan snapped a photograph with his phone, careful to angle it without the reflection of the glass. Valor growled again as the man left, slipping into the alley like a ghost. Declan exhaled slowly. Deals in the night were rarely innocent, and with children involved, the possibilities twisted into something unbearable. Inside the apartment, behind walls too thin to block sound, Ellie and Grace huddled together on a bare mattress. The single bulb above them flickered, painting the room in pale yellow. They clutched each other tightly, whispering prayers no one would hear. Grace held the teddy bear, its seams splitting, while Ellie stroked its worn ear. Maybe tomorrow, Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. Maybe tomorrow he won't be mad. Grace buried her face in her sister's shoulder. We just need milk. Their words dissolved into the silence same silence that had wrapped Declan years ago as a boy alone in Kentucky. The following day, Samantha arranged for Declan to speak discreetly with 2 potential witnesses. Mrs. Whitmore opened her door reluctantly, her frail frame swaddled in a knitted shawl. She had lived in the building for nearly 30 years, surviving on her late husband's pension and the company of her tabby cat. Her voice cracked with age, yet it held steady conviction. Those little girls, she said softly, I see them go through the trash. I hear them cry at night. Their mother used to smile, but after she passed, everything went dark. Travis, he changed. He started drinking more, gambling. He doesn't see children. He sees burdens. Her cloudy eyes misted. I was too afraid to speak before, but maybe it's time. Later, Declan and Samantha visited a corner store where the twins often lingered. Behind the counter stood Mr. Patel, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a tired yet kind face. An immigrant from Gujarat, he had run the store with his wife for 20 years, raising 2 children of his own who had since gone to college. He folded his hands, his accent gentle. Yes, I know the girls. They come in asking for noodles, sometimes on credit. I let them, even when they cannot pay. They always look hungry, too thin, too quiet. His gaze dropped to the counter. No child should live like that. He agreed to testify if necessary. Meanwhile, Travis escalated. More photos appeared online. More captions dripping with venom. Comments multiplied. Strangers branding Declan as dangerous, as unfit. The soldiers past his combat record, his medals, even his medical discharge were twisted into weapons. Headlines called him unstable, a loner with a violent history. For a man who had built his life on discipline and honor, it was a new kind of war, one fought with rumors instead of bullets. Yet Declan did not stand alone. Valor was always at his side, moving like an extension of his own shadow. At night, when Declan watched the apartment again, Valor kept vigilant. One evening, Valor bristled and growled sharply, his nose pressed to the glass. Declan followed his gaze and spotted Travis pacing near the window, a phone pressed to his ear, his gestures animated. Though Declan could not hear the words, he read the posture well enough. Travis was negotiating, his movements desperate, his eyes flicking toward the bedroom door where the twins lay asleep. Declan's gut twisted. He was no longer certain Travis only wanted money. He feared Travis was preparing to sell the girls. That realization settled on him like lead. For Declan, who had once stood watch over soldiers younger than himself, the idea of leaving children defenseless against men who saw them as currency was a nightmare made real. He clenched his fists, then reached down to Valor, scratching the dog's ear. "We won't let it happen," he whispered. Valor's ears flicked, his eyes unwavering, as though he too understood the vow. The storm that had been gathering finally broke on a wet, slate-gray evening when the Department of Children and Families received the final set of documents Samantha had been building. Declan stood outside the building, with Valor pressed close to his leg, the dog's breath steaming in the cold. The soldier had learned patience through long nights in hostile terrain, but the weight now felt different. It was not about his survival. It was about the survival of two little girls who had whispered that all they wanted was milk. At exactly 7 o'clock, an unmarked police cruiser pulled up beside Declan's truck. Out stepped a uniformed officer in his early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with hair going silver at the temples. His name was Lieutenant Carl Jennings, a veteran of the Seattle Force with 30 years of service etched into the lines of his face. He was known for his calm authority, a man who rarely raised his voice, yet commanded obedience through the steady weight of his presence. Beside him walked Marjorie Albright, a seasoned social worker with DCF. She was in her late 40s, African-American, dressed in a long gray coat with a clipboard tucked under her arm. Years of working with neglected children had given her an air of quiet resilience. She radiated empathy but carried an edge of unshakable steel when it came to protecting the young. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted softly, extending her hand. Her eyes flicked down at Valor, who sat poised and silent, then back to Declan. "Tonight we remove the girls. Please follow our instructions exactly. You are here as witness and guardian, not enforcer." Declan nodded, jaw tight. "Understood." They ascended the creaking stairs of the old building, their footsteps echoing in the stale air. When they reached Travis Dawson's door, the lieutenant knocked firmly. Inside, the faint thrum of music stopped. After a pause, Travis swung the door open, bleary-eyed, wearing a wrinkled flannel shirt and smelling of liquor. His face shifted instantly when he saw Declan. "You again," he spat. "I told you to stay the hell away." Jennings stepped forward, his badge gleaming in the dim light. "Mr. Dawson, we have a court-approved emergency child welfare order. Step aside." Travis tried to slam the door, but Valor lunged forward with a bark that shook the hallway. Startled, Travis stumbled back. Jennings and Albright pushed inside, with Declan and Valor close behind. The apartment looked worse than before, trash piled higher, bottles scattered across every surface, the air choking with smoke and mold. In the far corner, the twins sat huddled together, clutching their ragged teddy bear. Their eyes widened when they saw Declan, and for a flicker of a second, hope lit their faces. Albright approached them gently, crouching to their level. "Ellie, Grace," she said softly, "we're here to make sure you're safe. Do you want to come with us tonight?" The girls glanced at each other, then turned their gazes to Declan and Valor. In voices trembling but clear, they answered together. "We want to go with Uncle Declan and Valor." Travis exploded. "Over my dead body! He lunged forward, his arms swinging toward the girls. Before Jennings could react, Valor sprang, planting himself squarely between Travis and the children, his teeth bared, growl reverberating like thunder. Travis froze mid-step, rage twisting into fear. That hesitation was all the officer needed. Jennings moved in, twisting Travis's arm behind his back and pinning him against the wall with practiced force. "Enough," Jennings growled. "You've already gone too far." Travis cursed, struggling, but the fight drained quickly once the cold metal of handcuffs locked around his wrists. Albright gathered the twins, wrapping them in her coat. Valor pressed against them protectively, his eyes never leaving Travis. Declan crouched beside the girls, brushing damp hair from their foreheads. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice breaking despite himself. The emergency custody hearing was held the next morning in a modest courtroom that carried the hushed gravity of lives about to change. Declan sat beside Samantha Cole, dressed in a pressed suit that felt foreign on his soldier's frame. Valor lay obediently at his feet, his presence a quiet comfort, not just to Declan, but to the twins, who sat close together at the witness table, their small hands intertwined. Across the room, Travis looked unrecognizable, shaved, cleaned, dressed in a suit borrowed from his attorney. He tried to present the image of a grieving widower, unfairly judged. His lawyer, a sharp-tongued man named Victor Klein, painted a picture of tragedy. "Mr. Dawson has struggled since the loss of his wife. He has done his best under difficult circumstances. This so-called rescuer," Klein said, gesturing at Declan, "is an unstable veteran projecting his trauma onto someone else's children." Samantha rose with the calm confidence of a fencer choosing her strike. "Your Honor, we do not argue emotion, we argue fact." She began laying out the medical reports, signs of malnutrition, untreated bruises, psychological evaluations, noting fear and trauma. Then she played a recording provided by Mrs. Whitmore. Travis's drunken shouting echoing through the halls, the twins crying behind thin walls. Klein tried to object, but Samantha cut him down with precision. "No narrative can erase evidence." Finally, Albright testified. She spoke of finding the twins curled together, of the way their eyes had lit when Declan's name was mentioned, of Valor standing guard with unflinching devotion. She glanced at the dog resting quietly, then added, "That animal was not a pet that night. He was their shield, their protector." Sometimes truth doesn't come in words, but in the loyalty of those who cannot lie. The judge leaned forward, peering at the twins. "Children, where do you feel safe?" Ellie squeezed Grace's hand. Their voices, though soft, carried through the room. "With Uncle Declan and Valor." The courtroom fell silent. Travis surged to his feet, face purple with rage. "You little traitors," he began, but Jennings, present for security, placed a firm hand on his shoulder, forcing him back into his seat. Judge Morrison, a woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had weighed countless cases, raised her gavel. "The evidence is clear. For their safety, the minors will be placed under temporary custody of Mr. Declan Hayes pending further review. Visitation rights for Mr. Dawson are suspended until deemed safe." Declan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Valor raised his head as if sensing the shift, his tail thumping once against the floor. The twins leaned into Declan's side, and for the first time since he'd met them, he saw the faint glimmer of unguarded relief in their eyes. The war was not yet over. Custody battles rarely ended in a single stroke. But for this night, in this room, victory belonged to truth. The ruling of Judge Morrison lingered in Declan's ears long after the gavel had fallen. 90 days of temporary custody. For many, it might have sounded conditional, uncertain, a fragile bridge stretched over a storm. But for Declan, for Ellie and Grace, it was oxygen. It was the first breath of safety after too long choking in the dark. He had marched out of that courtroom with the twins pressed close to him, Valor's steady gait beside them, and for the first time in years, the soldier felt like he was walking towards something instead of away. Declan's apartment had once been a monument to solitude. Sparse furnishings, a bed made with military precision, shelves lined with books he rarely touched, and walls that echoed with silence. But silence was a soldier's companion, not a child's. Within days, that silence cracked open. Crayon drawings appeared, first scattered sheets taped to the refrigerator, wobbly houses with crooked chimneys, stick figures of two girls, a tall man, and a dog that took up nearly half the page. Declan smiled every time he passed them. The refrigerator, once orderly with magnets holding schedules and nothing else, became a gallery. Soon the floor was scattered with soft toys, shoes too small for his entryway rack, and the kind of joyful clutter he had never imagined tolerating, let alone cherishing. Valor adjusted easily. The German Shepherd had always been Declan's shadow, but now he became a guardian in earnest, following the girls from room to room, sleeping at the foot of their new shared bed, barking when strangers passed too close to the apartment door. Ellie had taken to curling against his flank when she read picture books, and Grace brushed his coat with a seriousness that mirrored how she had once cared for her threadbare teddy bear. Declan noticed how the dog's presence allowed the girls to breathe easier, to laugh louder, to drift into sleep without flinching at every sound. Valor wasn't just protection, he was proof that loyalty could be trusted. School was the next hurdle. On the morning of their first day, Declan dressed carefully as though he were preparing for inspection, though it was only to walk them to the gates. Ellie wore a pink ribbon in her hair. Grace clutched a lunchbox decorated with faded butterflies, and both gripped each other's hands so tightly Declan worried they might cut off circulation. He knelt before them at the school entrance, his soldier's frame folding awkwardly. "You'll be fine," he told them softly. "Just stay together, and remember Valor and I will be right here when you come out." They hesitated, then ran through the gates. Midway across the playground, Ellie stopped, tugging Grace to look back. Their wide eyes sought him, and when they found him standing straight, Valor sitting tall at his side, they smiled, small, cautious, but real. They waved, and Declan felt his chest tighten with something stronger than duty. It was trust. The school itself became a surprising ally. Mrs. Rowan, their third-grade teacher, was a woman in her early 50s with salt gray hair pulled into a bun and eyes that balanced sternness with warmth. She had raised 3 children of her own and carried the kind of patient authority that made even the rowdiest students fall into line. She welcomed the twins gently, noting their shyness and their way of clinging to each other. Within weeks, she called Declan after class, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "They're opening up," she told him. Ellie raises her hand now. Grace smiled when another girl shared her crayons. They're beginning to believe this is real. Declan listened, his hand resting on Valor's head, and for once he allowed himself to feel pride not tied to medals or service, but to the simple act of giving 2 children a place to grow. Evenings became rituals. Dinner at the table, sometimes clumsy pasta, sometimes grilled chicken when Declan remembered his own training in Army mess halls. The twins teased him about burning toast, and he let them, laughing in a way that felt rusty at first but grew smoother with time. Afterward, they colored or played simple board games, Valor stretching across the carpet like a watchful guardian. The apartment filled with sounds Declan hadn't known he missed. Laughter, bickering over who got the last cookie, even the occasional tears soothed by hugs rather than silence. One evening, after a day of school and giggles and the soft thud of Valor's paws chasing their play, Declan tucked the girls into bed. As he turned to leave, Ellie's small voice stopped him. "Uncle Declan," she whispered, her eyes wide in the dim light. "Is this really our home?" Declan froze. The question pierced through every layer of his soldier's armor. He knelt beside her bed, Grace shifting to listen. "Yes," he said, voice steady, firm, a promise carved from stone. "This is our home, yours, mine, and Valor's. Always." Ellie exhaled, her shoulders relaxing, and Valor lay down across the threshold of their room as though sealing the vow. The weeks passed, and the apartment transformed further. On the refrigerator, a new drawing appeared, this one larger, more detailed. A house with a bright sun overhead, 2 little girls in pink dresses holding hands. Beside them, a tall man in uniform and a German Shepherd painted with oversized ears. Beneath it, written in blocky letters, were the words, "Our family." Declan stood staring at it for a long time, his throat tightening, until he carefully smoothed it onto the refrigerator door with a magnet, placing it at the very center. For Declan Hayes, the soldier who had carried the weight of silence and scars, the battle had shifted into something he had never been trained for: fatherhood. Yet in the laughter of the twins, in the steady loyalty of valor, he began to understand that this was the fight worth giving everything to. The home was no longer a fortress of solitude. It was a place where broken lives were slowly mended, where trust replaced fear, and where love, fragile at first, was becoming unshakable. In the end, what began with two little girls whispering for milk became a story of finding a true home. Declan, the soldier who once carried only scars, discovered that love and family can be built not from blood, but from loyalty, trust, and the courage to protect the innocent. Valor, ever faithful, reminded us that sometimes the strongest guardians speak without words. This story is a reminder that every small act of care can change a life. If you were in Declan's place, would you have done the same for Ellie and Grace? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and follow our channel so you never miss the next story of hope, courage, and love.